Hi, I'm Jesse. I have a lot of books, and I like to share them with you. Today we're looking at the top 10 works of classic children's literature. So, what do I mean by classic children's literature? Well, I'm not sure. It was sort of hard to decide. What does literature mean anyway? The more I thought about it, the more I figured it just meant good and old. So that was sort of my criteria here. A lot of these books I've had since I was a child. Some of them I got from my mother when she was a child, and the books are excellent. They're ones I've read to my own daughter now. So let's count down the top 10. Coming in at number 10 is Pippi Longstocking. This is a classic. You might have seen movie, perhaps. It's not the only book on this list that's going to be about a red-haired girl with pigtails. Um, it's about this fun girl in Sweden. Is it Sweden? Norway? Finland? Let's say Sweden. Who is super strong, basically, with superpowers and wacky and fun and just entertains the neighboring kids and does all sorts of things. And she has a horse and she has a monkey, and wacky hijinks ensue. And it's pretty funny to read, and it's really good. It's from, I think, 1950, but the jokes and the humor still holds up, and it's a really great one. Okay, number 9 is the Wrinkle in Time series. It's from 1962, which is older than I thought, actually. And it's a little bit older of a children's series, and it follows a young girl and her brother as they go to different planets and different universes and discover all these weird mystical, astronomical things. And it's a lot of fun. It has some really interesting themes of family and discovery and all of these things. And it's bizarre in some places and interesting and really profound and good to read. Number 8, you'll have heard of. It's Winnie the Pooh. So there are 4 original Winnie the Pooh books. There's The House at Pooh Corner. There's Now We Are 6. There's Winnie the Pooh. And When We Were Very Young. These are classic editions that my mother had. I think they're from the 50s. They're a little beat up, as you can see. And they are just really enjoyable. The illustrations, Ernest Shepard, are just stunning. You've probably seen them now, the classic illustrations, and a lot of merchandise, not just the Disney illustrations, but the classic ones. 2 of the books are poetry, which is really interesting. I don't know how enjoyable that is to read to the kids, but the Pooh stories in the other 2 books are just classic and wonderful. And if you're ever visiting New York City and you want to see the original Winnie the Pooh dolls, you can go to the New York Public Library, and they're in the basement in the children's section. And you can see the original Winnie the Pooh, the original Tigger, Piglet, Kanga, all these characters, and the actual toys that Christopher Robin Milne had. It's really fun to see. All right, number 7 is the poetry books of Shel Silverstein. So we have Light in the Attic and Where the Sidewalk Ends. And I think Where the Sidewalk Ends was the first one. My daughter loves reading them. They're hilarious, joke, funny poems with these great, quirky illustrations. And it's just a lot of fun. It's a great way to introduce kids to poetry. A lot of kids have gotten introduced to poetry this way. And they're classic books and just really fun to read. Number 6 is Charlotte's Web. And I don't have a copy here. I looked and looked and I can't find my copy. It's probably still at my parents' house. But Charlotte's Web is a great book. It's about some pig and a spider at a farm. And there was a classic animated movie about it. It's touching and poignant and sad and fun and enjoyable, and a more mature book with a couple more mature themes, I think, than certainly maybe the Shel Silverstein books. And really good for kids, really good to read. Adults enjoy it too. Great book. Number 5 is The Wind in the Willows, and I've talked about this in one of my other videos. This edition, you'll find tons of illustrated editions. It's almost like a classic book that well-known illustrators love to illustrate. It seems like everyone has their own version. But this one I really like. It's illustrated by David Peterson. And this is a classic book about anthropomorphic animals who get into adventures. And it's just sort of this really enjoyable, relaxing story combined with the wacky adventures of Mr. Toad. And it has some sort of deeper meanings in some of the chapters and some deeper things, but mostly it's just relaxing to lay about in the fields with the characters, and just a lot of fun to read and beautiful to look at. Okay, number 4 is Alice in Wonderland, and the copy I have here is the annotated Alice. So it's dense because every page has a column of annotations. And don't read the annotations to the kids, but they're really necessary to understand all the in-jokes, all of the puns, all the songs, all the stories that Lewis Carroll did in reference to things of the day. And there's really no other way to know all of these things. It's just none of us except scholars probably know all of this ancient references and funny little jokes. But they really enrich the story to know that. Even without them, Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass are both excellent, fun stories for the kids. We have a graphic novel version we've read to my daughter as well. And lots of different editions have come out with different illustrations. These are showing the classic illustrations by John Tenniel. They're just excellent, and we all know the story now. It's become so classic, and it's classic for a reason. Speaking of real classics, this will be the most commonly known book on the list. It's The Wizard of Oz. I have some old editions here. I believe these were one of my parents, of the first 3 books. These were the books I might have read more than any other when I was a child. I would get out the series from the library over and over. They had these really large, I guess they seemed large to me as a child, hardcover books with all the great illustrations. The illustrator is John R. Neal, and for some reason the first book is by a different illustrator, but the rest of the series, and there were 14 books, are illustrated by John R. Neal, and they're just beautiful, stunning, classic age of illustration drawings. Dorothy looks different than you might picture her from the movie. She looks like a cross between Daisy from The Great Gatsby and Madonna. This is from 1900, and from 1900 to like 1915 or something, and it's just this classic era for these illustrations, and all of these wonderful characters, all the classic ones that we know from the movie, but also each book introduced new characters. It maybe was the first like robust world that I got into, with all this world building, all these different characters, and in the subsequent stories, different characters interact with each other, and you get a lot of humor, and you get a lot of drama and plot and things happening, and all sorts of interesting adventures. And it's really fun. The whole series is great. Okay, number 2, we have Anne of Green Gables. I had to look around quite a bit to find a really nice illustrated version like this one, which I think my daughter will enjoy more. We haven't read it yet. She's 9. I don't know if it's maybe a little bit too old for that. We might wait a year or two. It has some dark themes in it slightly. But it's really good. We might actually read first the graphic novel. This recent graphic novel came out, and it's just really beautiful, really nicely done. I really like it. This, of course, is the story of a young girl in Canada who moves in with this couple. They're not a couple, they're brother and sister, taking care of a farm, and opens their eyes to the joy of the world and the joy of imagination, and is such a lovable character. All the characters are. This was also a really good audiobook, narrated by Rachel McAdams, who does all these wonderful voices in it. It's really excellently done. So this is one of my favorite books, and it's just a classic piece of children's literature. And then coming in at number one, I cheated. I couldn't decide. So it's Roald Dahl. And my three favorite books of his are Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, and the BFG. So they have these new editions. The illustrations are classically by Quentin Blake. The BFG might be my number one here. It's sort of the most enjoyable book to read out loud that I've ever found. If I turn to a random page here, pinpoint, said the BFG. Map? I is never hearing these words before. Is this Air Force been talking slush bungle? The whole book is like that. It's just excellent. It's so much fun. I is flesh bunkled, roared the flesh lump eater. I is splits wiggled, yelled the child chewer. I is swog swalloped, bellowed the bone cruncher. I mean, you can't get better than that. The BFG is excellent. James and the Giant Peach is another favorite. I prefer a version I have of classic illustrations before Quentin Blake. Nancy Ekholm Burkert. Just a really, really great book. Also really fun to read out loud and do all the different voices of the centipede and the grasshopper and the ladybug. And it's this story of James who finds a magical peach, and it's created a lot of giant insects, but they're lovable insects and not as terrifying as that sounds. And he goes on these adventures. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory probably would not be in my number one, except for the fact that my daughter ended up loving it. Just absolutely loving it. And still, a year after we read it, goes on and on about these characters and how much she loves them, has created this whole AU, she calls an alternate universe, of stories about the characters after the book and what happens. And just has this whole rich imagination of all these stories about the characters, and really loves them. Of course, the movie, the first movie, I haven't seen the second one, is excellent and classic, and I think improves a couple things from the book. But the book is excellent. It's another one that's really fun to read out loud. All three of these are. And if I had to pick a single book from this list that you may not have read that you should, it's probably the BFG, because that is just such a blast. So that's it for the top 10 works of classic children's literature. Hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon with more books. Thanks so much.